Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are going to be taking a look at a game that was played in the early title Tuesday, today, July 9th of the year 2024. Now, this game that we're looking at is from the last round, and it is an epic matchup between Magnus Carlsen and none other than the famous first American world champion, Hans Niemann. Now, you may remember the two players played all the way back in St. Louis in 2022, which led to some big drama, a lawsuit, which of course I was also involved in. But today, we're back in the year 2024. And the players are playing over the board. So last round of the event, Hans and Magnus both on 9 points out of 10 heading into the final round. Now Hans has the white pieces and he opens with the move e4. After e4, we get the move e5, knight f3, knight c6, and now Hans plays the move bishop c4. Now on Hans's stream, when he was live streaming after the game, he said he could have forced a draw with this move bishop b5 going into a Berlin, but I honestly think that if Hans had played bishop b5, most likely it would have led to something quite different. I do not think Magnus would have played the Berlin defense and been happy with a draw. Nonetheless, Hans plays bishop c4, we get the move knight to f6, and after d3 and h6, we are now in the classic Gucci piano. Now you may also recall that I have actually started playing this line with h6 on move number 4 quite frequently. I played it in the candidates, I believe, against Vidit Santosh Gujarati. I played against Alireza Firouzja in Norway chess. It's a move which stops white from developing the bishop to g5 very early. So the game goes c3, we get d6 here from Magnus, we have a4, and now bishop e7. Now, in the candidates, I believe that I played this move g5 here or g6. I don't remember the exact move order. Black can try to push this pawn 1 or 2 squares forward and fianchetto the bishop. Magnus instead goes bishop e7. We get a5, castles, a6, b6, castles, and now we have the move bishop e6. Now, what Hans has done here is he's pushed his a pawn all the way up the board to try and create some queenside weaknesses. On the other hand, in an endgame, this pawn could become a very big target. So we get the trade of the bishops. We have the move knight d2, and now Magnus goes queen d7, and we have the move rook to e1. After rook to e1, we get this move rook a d8 being played, and now Hans goes knight f1. Here Magnus plays rook f7, which I think is to either play bishop f8 or stack the two towers on the f file. After rook f7, we get h3, and now rook d to f8, knight g3, and now Magnus goes queen c8. Now what Magnus is doing here is he's put the two towers on the f file. The queen also targets this pawn on a6, and now we have what is essentially a cat and mouse game of waiting. It's more on Hans to come up with an idea, whereas Magnus has achieved his optimal setup. So we get bishop e3. Magnus plays knight to d7, we get d4, and now pawn takes, and the move knight d to b8. Now what Magnus is doing is he's trying to basically argue that in the long run, these two rooks on the open file are very well placed. The pawn on a6 is also a big target, and white's big white center could become a little bit brittle down the road. So we get queen e2, Magnus plays knight b4 here, trying to take advantage of this pawn being on a6. A classic example of why Hans, by pushing this a pawn down the board, is simply out of touch with how you should play the position. So after knight b4, we get rook c1. Now c5 played here by Magnus, we get e5, and now the move d5. Now what has happened here is that Magnus now has his own bit of a center with these three pawns on e6, d5, and c5, and white's center isn't so great anymore, and you're going to be losing this pawn on a6 down the road. Hans trades on c5, plays his move knight to d4, and now Magnus moves the queen to d7 so he can try to capture the horse without losing his queen. We get the move knight to c2, Magnus plays d4, and now we have the move rook d1, and Magnus plays knight d5. Now at this point, Magnus in a couple of moves has shown why he is such a great positional player. He has completely outplayed the first American world champion in this position, and he now has achieved a winning advantage. Now how this occurred is that Hans clearly was afraid of these pawns that were rolling down the center, so he tried to be cool with knight d4, but as soon as Magnus starts pushing this p, this pawn on f2 becomes a serious target here. The bishop has to move away, and white's position is simply in tatters. So we get rook d1, knight d5, bishop d2, and here the move rook takes f2 is played by Magnus. Now what Hans plays is the move queen g4. If Hans were to take the two towers here in return for the queen, after this move bishop h4, the knight is under massive pressure, and black will win the game in short order. So we get queen g4. Now we have the move king h8 being played by Magnus. Hans goes knight h5. Hans hoping for some glory, the dream glory, to create the checkmate on g7, but Magnus says no by playing the move bishop d8. Now when Magnus goes bishop d8, the queen guards the pawn against the mate threat on g7, but he also can try to put this bishop on b6 and start pushing p. So just to illustrate the point, if you can get some position like this, let's just say not rook c1, sorry, something like rook b1, d3, knight e1, and c4, suddenly the pawns are marching up the board. The bishop is on a really nice diagonal, and black is completely winning. So a multi-purpose move, stop the mate in 1 and go for bishop b6. We have the move b4 played here by Hans, and now Magnus plays the move knight c6. Now after knight c6 is played here, Magnus is putting massive pressure on the pawn on e5. He's also got the double stack and the kebab on the second rank, and unless Hans can create a big attack here on the king side, it is all over. So Hans plays the move b takes c5. Now keep in mind, you will notice from the times that both players are moving quite slowly here in this position. They're trying to find precise moves. So you got pawn takes pawn. Magnus plays knight takes e5, and now Hans plays the move queen d4. Now, if Magnus had 5 minutes on the clock here, I'm pretty sure he would find the really stylish finish to win the game with the rook sack, which is the move rook takes g2, sacking the rook, because after king takes g2 and queen c6, suddenly there's a massive threat on this long diagonal towards the white king on g2. If you go king h2, you get forked by knight f3, winning the queen. King g1, same problem, same fork, gg, why not? If you play a move like queen e5, I have this move knight e3 with the classic fossil and the double check, and once you move the king, it's checkmate immediately with queen g2, as the king has no escape squares. So if Magnus had 5 minutes, I'm sure that he would sack the rook, but unfortunately for Magnus, he only has 13.4 seconds left. So in this position, Magnus instead plays a very practical move, bishop c7, highlighting another purpose of this move, bishop d8, which is that now you can use this nice long diagonal for the dark square b on the c7 square. After bishop c7, we get to move queen e4, and now Magnus lines up the legendary triple stack, also known as Aliocha's gun, with the queen and the 2 rooks lined up here. You target the knight on h5, you threaten to sack the rook, or try and checkmate with rook f1. So after queen to f7 is played here by Magnus, Hans plays the move knight to g3. Now Magnus here goes knight to f3, sacking the horse and checking the king. Now, if white were to take the rook, for example, after knight takes bishop, you're checking the king here on f2 with the queen, and white is going to lose this queen on e4 and the game. So after knight to f3, Hans decides to take the knight, and now Magnus plays another very good move, rook takes f3. Now, when I was doing the live commentary, the play-by-play as you could call it, I thought that Magnus could also take on g3, but after bishop g3 and knight to d4, suddenly it's not so clear how black is going to win the game, because the knight guards the pawn on e6 is weak, and after e5 and bishop to e1, suddenly the rook and the bishop are weak, the knight guards the pawn, and the game becomes very messy, and with limited time on the clock, it's not clear whether Magnus would have won. Now keep in mind, we are talking about Magnus Carlsen, the greatest chess player of all time, and he does find the correct move here with rook takes f3 instead. So after rook takes f3 is played, we get the move knight to e2 from Hans, and now Magnus goes for queen h5. Now, again, both players very low on time. Expecting perfect play is not something you can count on, but the computer likes this very quiet move, rook to f6 here, with the idea of rook g6. One sample line is say knight d4, rook g6 check, king h1. You're like, wait, there are no checks, there are no ways to win. But in this position, there is a bone crusher with the move queen to f2, threatening checkmate on h2, and white is simply completely lost here. Sample line, knight f4. Let's say you go knight takes f4, bishop takes f4, bishop takes f4, threatening mate on h2, knight f3, and now there's queen g2 mate. So you can't really stop the 2 mates on h2 or g2, and so black is winning. Now again, very easy with Stonefish to see these things. In general, with seconds on the clock, not realistic, but I do think in a classical game there's a good chance that Magnus would have played rook to f6. So instead, Magnus goes queen h5, very logical move. We get queen g4, and now Magnus plays queen e5 here. What Magnus has lined up is the classic wooden shield here with the queen on e5, but also he's threatening to create the double A battery checkmate on h2 with the queen. So here Hans plays the move knight f4, desperately flailing to try and do something to keep the dream alive, but this is pretty much it. Now the computer wanted queen g2. It would have been very interesting to see what Magnus would have done after this move, honestly, because in this position the best move is rook 8 to f6, maybe even rook 3 to f6. Oh no, rook 3 f6 allows rook f1, so I think you have to go here, because now if rook f1 you have rook g6 sacking the rooks, and if queen g6 there's queen h2 mate. If rook f3 you play queen h2 and you win the queen and the game. Very dank stuff, but it would have been really interesting to see whether Magnus with 7 seconds on the clock would have been able to find this move rook 8 to f6, because it's not an obvious move, it's not easy, and I think there's a decent chance that Hans could have won the game if he had found queen g2. But once again, we're talking about Hans, who is not the first American world champion, and he's unable to find the best move, so instead he plays this move knight to f4. Now after knight to f4, Magnus now plays the move knight takes f4, taking back what looked like a free piece initially, and here Hans plays queen takes rook. Now if white were to play bishop takes f4 here, after rook 8 takes f4, you have the two towers. Let's just say queen g6 for example. There's mate in 2 because you sack the rook with rook g4 check, queen g4, and queen h2 mate. And here, if white goes queen g2 for example, I mean there are literally 20 ways to win here. Probably in my opinion I would just go rook to f2 here, and after takes, and queen h2, you collect the horse and win the game. So Hans decides to play the move queen takes f3, taking what he thinks is a free rook, but now Magnus is able to play knight to e2, creating the fossil by checking the king, and the rook targets the queen. Hans goes king to g2 here, and now we have the move queen to h2 from Magnus, which ends the game. Now Magnus could take the queen and probably still win, but after king f3 and knight g3, there's still some work to be done. Of course black will win the game, but there's no need to allow this. So Magnus plays queen to h2, checking the king. We get king to f1, and now the move rook takes queen. Hans, in his truly disrespectful state, does not resign the game. He could have resigned after queen h2. He plays king e1, forcing Magnus to checkmate him with the move queen to f2. After queen to f2 is played, this is a checkmate. Hans's king is stuck on e1, and with that, Magnus Carlsen wins the game and wins the early title Tuesday. So a fantastic game from Magnus Carlsen, showing why he is the 5-time world champion. He is the greatest player in the world, unlike a certain wannabe, and it's just a really good game from start to finish. So Magnus gets a win. He wins title Tuesday, his first one in quite a while, but it is great to see Magnus back playing this event. Hopefully everything is good. He did recently withdraw from the Grand Chester event in Croatia due to a family emergency, so wishing Magnus nothing but the best. But at any rate, just great to see Magnus showing why he is the best player in the world. So on that note, you guys, I hope you've enjoyed this recap from the early title Tuesday today, July 9th of the year 2024. If you are not already subscribed to the YouTube channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below, and we will be back soon with some more great recaps from Levy's event, from maybe my title Tuesdays. Hopefully I can do better than today, and yeah, I hope you guys have enjoyed it, and have a great rest of your day. Have a good one, everybody. See you. Bye.